Welcome to the Classic Adventure Gaming Podcast, everybody. This is episode 3. My name is Gus, and I am joined by my co-host Josh. Josh, how you doing this fine evening?
Doing great, Gus. Yeah, super excited. Get this third one out. It's been really cool too. We've got the Discord up and running, so we've got a fair amount of people in there. Really been fun tracking the conversations in there. We even have a member who's going to be hosting an adventure site creation contest. So a lot of fun stuff happening over there. Definitely recommend people go ahead and check it out. But how about you? How you been doing?
Doing great. Very excited for all the things that you just mentioned. Also started running a AD&D game, specifically the Castle of the Silver Prince by none other than Anthony Huso. So been sinking my teeth into that and still running my Dwaro Deep game on the weekly. So, yep, trying to keep the no games moniker off of my back. That being said, Josh, what exciting topic do we have to cover today?
Yeah, so today this episode's really going to be kind of an addendum to the first episode. In that first one, we went over kind of the mechanics of fantasy adventure gaming and then how to set up a campaign for it. This kind of goes more into the social element. So, giving people tools for setting expectations for their players, and just kind of working to overall establish a good play culture that supports the kind of games we want to run. So, should be a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Very much looking forward to this conversation. So, let's jump right into it with the boys. All right, welcome. Thanks everybody for joining us on this third episode of the podcast. We're going to have a little bit of a conversation around play culture as it relates to fantasy adventure games. So we're going to open this thing up right away. What is the importance for you gentlemen to the culture that is built up around fantasy adventure gaming? Why is that important to discuss? And why are we going to have a conversation about it today?
Well, one reason I think it's important is because, one of the reasons why we started trying to differentiate fantasy adventure gaming was to get out of the arguments, right? So, um, I think it's important to have a defined culture so that people can opt out before they even waste their time if they know that's not what they're looking to do.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I still think that probably a lot of conflicts in this little corner of the RPG zone that we're currently inhabiting arise from, I guess, differences of expectation. And as the definition of say OSR gets more and more blurry, these conflicts are really only going to increase. So it's definitely a good idea if you're trying to do something new, you're trying to differentiate yourself, to sort of establish what you're what you're about, not just on a mechanical campaign kind of level, but also I guess sort of like I don't know, a culture, an ethos, what kind of people you're looking for, that sort of stuff.
It's interesting how it's almost like going back to the beginning. Of the OSR, where it was originally very different, and then eventually people wanted more and more people to come in to the point where now nobody can even explain what it is, and so then this comes out of it, and it's once again trying to be different. It might just be like the cycle in RPGs where there's this tension between trying to be something specific versus not
Getting
letting
reabsorbed in a sort of
yes
primordial chaos. Yes.
So the original objective of old school gaming was sort of a demarcation, a refoundation, and as you have mentioned, the broader game culture eventually came back, and there are obvious benefits to a big tent approach, but what we around this podcast and in this smaller community should be looking at is a smaller tent that is again well defined and that plays to the advantages of a play form that we try to cultivate.
And I think it's also necessary, right? Because it's, you know, I think this is a recurring point, that it's ultimately, it's not a play style that's going to appeal to everyone, and nor should that, if it wants to exist, be the ultimate goal.
we started out driving cars on the road, and then those cars got joined by motorcycles and trucks and
Short buses.
farm
Yeah.
vehicles and short buses and clown cars and really creepy vans. And we're saying, hey, we're just trying to drive cars. We are car enthusiasts. It's cool that you like your motorcycle and it's cool that you like your creepy van, but that's not what we're about. We're talking about cars.
Oh yeah, well
Yeah,
said.
and I think that dynamic in the broader hobby. I mean, thinking back on the foundations of the OSR and how it evolved. I mean, that also goes back to the way that you pick your table, right? I mean, one of the things that with the broader hobby, um, it was a mix of people who wanted to do a particular thing, and it was a mix of people who wanted to find a way to make a particular thing appeal to everybody. And those two things are incompatible. And eventually, the people who wanted to appeal to everybody changed the thing in order to do that, instead of being willing to let people who weren't inclined to it do something else with different people.
Cars started turning into
We could
brats.
we could say that something similar happened at the dawn of the hobby. That the original pool of gamers had a different idea than the people who came afterwards, and that ended up cannibalizing the old school way of doing things, and that's why it had to be rediscovered, because it was eventually diluted into a different sort of formula, which might have some virtues, but it was clearly not the same that was there at the beginning. When we look back at that historical moment, we can see that there are clear and very strong parallels with our situation now.
Yeah, I think so. And it's also I guess it represents sort of you're right, it might be a sort of eternal cycle because of the sort of first mover advantage that Dungeons and Dragons has and maybe always will have. But I yeah, it also strikes me that like I'm reading through these old and reviewing obviously these old fight on issues right now, and it is very interesting to see, this sort of wild idealistic advocation for just creativity um, and infinite possibility, but that kind of may only make sense against the backdrop, right, of a very hyper codified sort of mechanistic system of like the D20 system, right? Eventually, it starts out as a bunch of dudes who've been playing the game for years. I feel, knowing pretty much exactly what rules to break and what not rules not to break, and saying like, "Listen, we can do all of this crazy stuff." But then you get these successive generations that don't have the context. And they're still inculcated with this idea of like, yes, infinite possibility, big tent, OSR, until nobody has any idea. There's a sort of vestigial reflex-like awareness of what old school gaming is. It's random tables, diegetic advancement, and dice drops. But the sort of like this spirit is long gone.
We had this outlook like we were perpetually just climbing up this mountain. So we were looking at it from like the base of the mountain, the start of the trail, and we were, starting along the trail, and we were like, well, this thing is wide open. This thing is going to take forever for us to climb. The sky's the limit, literally. And I think that point of view definitely changes when you have people that are already at the peak of the mountain looking down, right? So if they're already involved with like a WotC edition of D&D and they've gotten their foundation from being up in the clouds, and they have to come down the mountain to kind of meet us halfway, and that gives a completely different perspective about like where we're trying to get.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why in the first few episodes, I mean, we really went after some sacred cows, like attacking, the idea of role playing and stuff like that. I mean, the point is to shock, in a way, people into realizing that something is different, so that they don't start looking at it from the top down. They feel like they need to approach it from the same base of the mountain that we did, because it's almost not the same mountain.
And maybe on that note, at this point, it would be kind of helpful to differentiate what some of the different like play cultures that we see are, and kind of juxtapose them against adventure gaming.
I think the easiest one is just the common one that you see on social media today. It's a culture of the creativity that we talked about, where it's about being a little creative, just posting up the results of your creativity, getting some kudos for it. You don't have to ever play to be a full participant socially in that hobby. And that to me is the biggest difference. Fantasy adventure gaming is all about play.
Yeah, I think you you kind of nailed it. The what do you call it? Hit the nail on the head with that one. I think that's also like one of the most, I guess, in a way, the most destructive. You always see that with different media, whenever you move away from active participation into, it can be anything. It can be collection. It can be just a sort of like, what do you call that, surface level imitation. Like, I'm going to pretend that I'm a creative. I'll get the same likes. People will buy it, but it'll actually not get used at all. um that's probably the worst one. The one I, feel is still very relevant to bring up, because there are still a lot of people in the hobby who actually play quite a bit, but still have a completely different basis. I think is just the sort of, I feel, the factory, default, kind of like the mainstream that didn't come from a wargaming background, but that eventually caused D&D to change in the first place. It's just the sort of like trad gamers, the guys who, people who prefer a type of more, I guess, sort of like linear or episodic type of game. It's definitely not, a sandbox. It's maybe episodic. It might have a plot. It's more focused on role playing and, of course, the aforementioned silly voices, that sort of stuff. It gets done quite a bit, but it is very, and there is a degree of like, I think, compatibility, but just be aware that people might not have the same priorities, or might not try to get the same thing out of the game that you are when you set up your fantasy adventure game.
There's definitely a strong element of non-gaming around gaming. You have these role-playing themed artwork that does not really connect to actual gaming. You have even role-playing themed role-playing games that are more like art books, or sort of the kind of
Coffee
stuff
table
that you
books.
you read on read during the morning and evening, and that sort of context. But there is also the great mass of play, which nowadays a lot of it is also a form of passive entertainment, which is delivered by podcasts, or these video casts, and there you have it's almost like sort of watching other players play, and that's the extent of your participation in the hobby. And we can't say that this is a niche, and the actual play people are the majority even. I mean, Critical Role might be almost as big as actual play.
I think so. I hope in the OSR that it's less depressing, but it's probably getting more depressing every year, especially with this sort of like blurring. Yes, the surface level mimicry and shifting from, I guess, RPGs as a, an activity, to some sort of identity, or a participatory sort of activity, has been very devastating. Um, there was another one. I actually, is this like different styles of play, or is this different? I guess sort of like currents. Uh, because I imagine too, like when we talk about fantasy adventure gaming, this is uh, we want, right. We want a dedication. We want persistent. Maybe not the same players every time, right? But you do want like one sort of like persistent game that you work on over and over and over again, like a sort of like samurai sword, and you hone your skills, you build out your world, and that sort of stuff, right? Like, and players too, they get to alter things. But there's a huge um, I think a huge percentage of like players, even in the OSR, and I'm talking about people who do actually play. I feel like a very large percentage is these campaigns are not super long. This is more like, you because it's more casual. You play online. You do one shots. You maybe run an adventure, something like that, right?
Yeah, I was going to interject that there's a lot of one shots. A lot of people will be like, "Hey, I got this module and I want to get my money's worth out of it," and then they run the module and then they disappear for 4 months.
Right. So I mean, there's the people who do not play a lot. Then there's the people who play a lot, but it's short and disconnected. Um, then there's the people who don't feel that player skill is necessary, or that if it's there, it needs to be pretended it's not there. Those are all ways to define kind of in the negative against what fantasy adventure gaming is, where it's ideally it's a group of players exploring a particular system over time throughout the entire range of the gameplay experience, and not having to keep learning new systems every other week, focused around play.
I think yeah, even the new the people drifting endlessly from system to system is also something I've seen a lot. Yeah, and maybe it's a good idea to sort of like pin down why do we want why do we want people to play persistently? Why not have a different system every week?
Lot of the indie community, well, story games and such, they typically play like modern modern board games that one evening you play two of them, or you play one for a few sessions and then move on to the others. I don't really think this is necessarily bad. I have played some of these and enjoyed them, but the persistence of complex, larger campaigns is definitely a strength that we can focus on in the fantasy adventure gaming um, sphere. Definitely.
And I think there's a lot of people out there who want to experience the late stages of these games. I mean, every time this comes up in discussion elsewhere, you see people saying, "I read that looks really cool. How does it work? I've never done this." And it's hard to ever get to that point in a different play style, because it's just constantly going back to square one after 3 or 4 steps forward, and then go back to square one in a new system, and then go back to square one again. So I think that's one of the reasons why we focus on trying to not system hop, is because people actually do want that. They're never going to get that in the other play style. So
Yeah,
by
I've
focusing on it here,
oh, sorry about that. Yeah, no, I've also sort of recognized this, that it is a type of like recklessness that eventually leads to a massive polarization of what I guess what D&D is and can be about. Um, so yeah, well said. There was one other. I feel like bringing it up. It's the you don't really encounter them on Roll20 a lot. We're going to get into playing online later on. But just be prepared if you're ever on Roll20 and you host a game with randos, you're going to run into them. It's the OC culture. So in I think in trad gaming for a while, it used to be a thing that, and this trend is mostly dead. You still have a few holdouts that like the game was just like this brilliant story that the DM, he could tell in his world, and the players were just sort of like, tiny characters therein, and the DM had to bend the game. Um, so it was given full leeway to sort of like bend the game and the probabilities of the game so that this epic story could unfold. Right? It was very DM focused. That kind of died, but that ethos, it still persists, but now it's reversed. Now all the players, they get to live out this sort of unique fantasy of their character, and the DM is a sort of cheerleader that is there to sort of facilitate this sort of self-indulgent fashion show kind of gameplay, and it's actually pretty common. So if you're going to go on Roll20 and play with randos, you will run into those people as well.
Interesting that you brought up these trad gaming long form campaigns. This was sort of the bane of that game form, that a lot of these were aspirational. The GM outlining a grandiose world and epic storyline with lots of complexity and such. And in my experience, a lot of these floundered because they didn't work out for personal reasons, sure, but also because the structures and the tool sets weren't really appropriate, or weren't used successfully. So when we try to sort of support a campaign-centric approach in fantasy adventure gaming, what we should be looking at is looking at techniques and solutions which make our campaigns work and um, sort of help other people also learn them how to manage their larger sandboxes or such.
I was going to also add that I think that rather than kind of coming up with another play culture, I'd go about it a different way. Is that fantasy adventure gaming, to me at least, is about experiencing all the game, not just the low levels. So if you get stuck in the mire of like mudcore, it also means you don't really get to experience all the game. You just get to experience the low levels. You know, you get shot by an errant arrow and you're dead, and that's it. And I think that that kind of gets dangerously close to other system territory. But I think that fantasy adventure gaming is about, you know, more of a broader sense that the game is available to the players through good play to experience as much of the game as possible, not just the, you know, the first 3 levels.
Yeah, that's another thing I've definitely noticed in I guess in the OSR for a while now. That sort of spurred me to do No Art Punk 3 dedicated solely to like more high level adventures, because like I feel everything that's coming out is just like infinite dungeons of infinite adventures for levels 1 to 3, right?
Yeah.
And it's kind of depressing. Like there's more. I feel like you get this you get this game and you see all of these possibilities, and then you're slumming it in the tutorial levels for all eternity, right?
Yeah, these rule books that they have all these levels and they have all these spells that are all these different levels and all these cool magic items and stuff, and you're never going to see them.
Oh, and that's a shame.
And that really, for a culture standpoint, that grounds it back into pro skill. Fantasy adventure gaming is pro skill. Other traditional role playing games are almost anti skill, because in that desire to be something for everybody, to where a newcomer can just walk in and be just as comfortable and the game is just as accessible to them as somebody who's been doing it a long time. The type of play that is typified by a high level of skill is almost punished or discouraged. You have to act like a newcomer, et cetera, et cetera. We talked about characterization before, but in terms of the culture, setting the expectation that, look, we all start out at something not very good, but we keep doing it and we iterate and we get better, and suddenly, to use an American football metaphor, they say that the field slows down for players after a couple of years in the league. The game slows down. In fantasy adventure gaming, you start to you get enough of the basics where you start to be able to extrapolate out and play with more of the system at once. You begin to juggle more balls in the air. And that feeling when the whole table is clicking and everybody knows what their characters do and everybody understands the game well enough to be able to understand a situation that they're in and how to use the system and their own creativity and imagination through the system to resolve that situation and gain their goals and keep moving forward and have fun and laughs and everything. That's what you're trying to capture in a culture. You're trying to get away from the hesitant, unsure, I don't really know what I'm doing, but I'm here to have fun, and I can just crack some jokes at the table, and the game is almost secondary. The specific game. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why you can hop rules every 3 months, is because the game system itself is almost irrelevant, other than if it inspires this sort of non-game creativity around the table.
Yeah, that's also I think something like obviously. I mean, first of all, I love cracking jokes. But I think that is also like yeah, that is important, that you do need people that obviously, you're there to like chill out with your friends, but there's a reason you go through all of this trouble. If you're just there to like purely socialize, play cards together, it's great fun, hartjagen or whatever, right? Play bridge. But yeah, there should be some sort of motivation that I think at least for some players, you need at least a few guys on your table that that are there for more than just a social interaction. I feel it's not a disaster to have one or two players that are there, and that uh, they're not going to be looking up stuff uh, you know, uh, in the rule books in between sessions. They're not going to be super involved, but they play reasonably well and they're there to have a good time. That's fine to have one or two of those guys, I feel.
So I really like this would be a perfect transition into like kind of the next component. We're talking about players at our tables. So for for each of you, you have your own experiences developing your own tables over the years. Let's talk a little bit about how you came to have those players at your tables, kind of the progression of, finding individuals that were interested in adventure gaming and this culture and style of play, like-minded players, if you will. And then we'll kind of move into Prince, you alluded to it earlier, around the differences between in-person, in real life games, creating those tables and those cultures, as well as what you're going to run into for creating the same thing in the online environment, kind of the pros and cons. We'll get into that. But yeah, starting out, what are your guys' experiences around finding a table, whether it be online or offline, for folks that want to experience this culture or interested in this culture and this style of play?
So my real life group, the core of it, I mean, we learned together. So that was, when TSR was still a company, learning the game together. So we kind of all came from the same beginning part of that trail. So I don't think that that's very helpful for somebody in 2023 to look for like-minded people. However, the online group I have for Spire, just being part of the community and finding people that I felt were like-minded enough or to play a game where we generally would all enjoy the same thing. I was part of that community for like 2 years before I started. And I was able to start a group based off of that because I knew that those people were, for the most part, like-minded. There were a few that weren't, but most are. And I think that finding people that are into the similar things that you are, that enjoy the same kind of things that you like, that you can have intelligent conversations with, kind of gets a lot of that awkwardness out of the way, so that you can have more of like a long-standing group of people that that it's already got a level of respect when you sit down at a table. Whereas when you put together like an open table, you run into a whole battery of problems that you can weed out just from getting to know people. So there's the people that are tourists, especially with like AD&D. A lot of people in the space have played OSC, DCC, or they played AD&D 2 in 1997, and they hear people talk about how much AD&D did right, and they simply want to see it for themselves. You got people that are rules auditors, that they misread something, and they're going to keep interrupting the game to be like, well, isn't range on this, blah 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 blah. And stuff like that just kind of takes away from the game. Every once in a while they're right, but for the most part they're wrong. The other thing is to be careful of in online spaces, especially in a community like this, is most people they're already GMs. So they approach the games with that level of mindset rather than the mindset of a player who's just looking to join up to a game and enjoy. And so when you have like another GM at the table, it's almost like there's like a kind of a interruption with the flow of how the table goes around. The other problem is that, particularly with a group of strangers, a lot of people are wallflowers. They'll stand in the hallway while active people take all the risks, and they'll only engage when they're directly calling out. So it kind of puts a lot of pressure on the more active players. And then conversely to that, you have people that just always feel the need to be in the driver's seat, and they kind of step on other people that are trying to participate. And then the last thing you run into, we already touched on, is that DMs are flaky and will just often stop after 2 or 3 sessions. So like the open table thing can have like a lot of things working against it. But if you get to know a good circle of like a dozen people, then like you probably have a pretty good basis to start a game if you can identify that these people would be pretty cool to play with.
I guess I'll respond. So to give a little bit of background, right? I also grew up playing with my friends, right? And so it's a completely different social dynamic. I guess giving the advice to new people that want to play role playing games to just play with your friends, you idiots. Like it's probably not very helpful, even though it is probably still the best option. But um, I would definitely I guess I'm at the on the opposite side now. Running games online is logistically it's a lot simpler. And yeah, I mean, if you also occasionally, I mean, I write for publication occasionally, right? Like, so I'm playtesting my adventure now, so I have a great reason. But even before that, I kind of enjoy. Um, I don't mind an open table. It's fun, right? If people act out of turn, or if they're idiots, it's not that different from sort of the skills you have to learn as a DM anyway, right? Even if you're playing with your friends. If you play with more than one group, if you've played with different groups, which I did do as I grew up, you kind of have to pick up like how to manage all of that, how to manage wallflowers, people that hog the spotlight, all of that stuff. Uh, but this is I think we alluded to this earlier. This is a matter of, I think, personal preference. There's a degree to which some people will be comfortable with interacting with randos and be okay with, like, occasionally you'll get somebody like where you're like, what a disaster, how did this guy get through? Right. um versus just being all right with that sort of like risk. And I think the best way is it's like you alluded to before. You probably shouldn't just go on roll 20, put up an ad, and then see who shows up, because
Yeah,
you'll
yeah.
be this is a nightmare. Don't do this to yourself. I was in Vengers playtests, right, for Child. This was crazy. Like 50%, these were 2.5 hour sessions. 50% would be gone by the end. People would be you would just get like weirdos, and just the most bizarre people would show up. They would have no idea what the system was. They don't even read the ad. Like it's nuts, right? Going if you want to play D&D for whatever reason, and for whatever reason, maybe it's logistically it's difficult, maybe all your friends moved, maybe everybody is playing 5e and you can't seem to convince them otherwise, and you want to try it out online. I would say, yeah, join some sort of like community that is more or less like-minded, or at least has a component, is likely to have the type of players with overlapping interests, um, and try it from there. And then usually you can generally tell after interacting with them online for, uh, I personally, 30 minutes is usually enough to see if they're complete weirdos, uh, right? And then you can usually have a game with them. Maybe they'll flake out at some point. Online games, the investment is lower, so people are also more likely to break off. Again, be okay with that. But the problem is, if you want to have like a super ambitious, if you go in there with the idea of like, I'm going to have a super ambitious long-term campaign, then you might require more vetting.
Yeah, I think it's different for in real life games versus online games. And for putting a table together in real life, what's generally worked for me is I have a type that I recruit for. They're people who do a lot of things. Does not necessarily have anything to do with gaming, but I mean, they tend to be people who you see over time that they're active. They they get out and are active people everywhere. It's not just in gaming. Those people typically will actually, if they say that they want to try something, they will do it. If they like it, they'll keep doing it. It won't be this persistent flaking that is constantly complained about in hobby discussions everywhere. The other pool of people, a subset of the pool, I guess I should say, that is really rich are the people who used to play. Like it'll come up in conversation. I'll mention, oh, I run D&D campaigns. And they'll say, really? I used to play that. Oh, you did? When did you play? When did you stop? Uh, why did you stop? Et cetera, et cetera. There are actually quite a few people out there who used to play the older editions of D&D who stopped because the older editions of D&D became something unrecognizable that they didn't enjoy. So sometimes when they find out that you still run games in an old school style and you also don't subscribe to the way that the hobby kind of evolved culturally over time. Now their interest is perked. They might want to go ahead and give it a shot. So I would probably about half the people who played in real life games are people like that. And often it's those type of people grabbing a friend that they have who is similar to them that used to play and it stopped because they just couldn't find enjoyable gaming experiences. Um, and they'll be like, "Hey, I just got into a game," and so your table will kind of fill up. So that's what's worked for me. Now that may also just be due to my demographic, but in terms of putting a table together in real life, that's what I've used. Um, the other thing is that you have to be okay with no. In fact, you have to want to get to know as quickly as possible. You don't want to beat around the bush. If you present the game in such a way that people who are not a fit for it quickly identify that they're not a fit for it, and they're like, "Oh, that no thanks, man." That is a win. A lot of times, what I'll see is guys who are trying to recruit, are trying to find a way to get a particular person to play the game, and so they never want to get to know. They're trying to forestall no, and it just becomes a frustrating process. So I'm very upfront about what I run. I'm very upfront about how it's different from what most people are used to in role playing games, and that filters out a lot of undesirable candidates very quickly that I'm not spending time on, and then I can focus in on the people whose interest is perked by that. So in terms of putting a table together, those are what I would say are the two biggest things. Like the word no, don't dislike it, like it, and be willing to hear it and try to get to it as quickly as possible. And number two, look for people who already are active and possibly have some experience with this style of play even before it was ever defined.
Building gradually is not always the most helpful advice to somebody starting out, because it's like, I'm drinking at this tavern that I built with my own hands over 30 years, and that's not really the most helpful. But one thing that I have found very useful is to use mini convention pickup games for sort of introducing people to the style and sort of establishing the basics of the style. And uh, if they like it, we might later on sort of start to organize games together. And if they prefer something else, then we can just say, okay, we have had a good session, and that's it. Because just fairly recently, we have had a few games with one guy who well, he enjoyed the game, but he thought it was too deadly, uh, and because his game approach was a bit different, and it ended up frustrating him. And okay, we said, okay, this doesn't not work out. So communicating is important in the start, but also sort of a try before you buy is pretty useful. And local conventions, if you can find them or organize them, are that's what they are for. They are for finding people who are on a similar wavelength.
On that note, I would say write a good pitch. I definitely agree that you should write something that repels people that will not be interested in your game. But
Yes,
also,
definitely.
you should you should not neglect the part where you you do attract the people that that will be interested, right? So yeah, no, I would say try to figure out a way, like yeah, to characterize your game. What can people like expect from it? What is like cool, right? Don't lie, obviously. Don't create false expectations, but do try to go like, well, like what can people expect from this game? And even I would say if you're going to solicit online, uh, be upfront about what how long you expect this game to last. I've heard like horror stories of this guy tried online gaming and he's like that was like my ex DM. He hates online gaming, by the way, but he tried some online gaming and he got totally burnt out because he wanted to run Stars Without Numbers. He did all this prep and then you know uh he gets introduced to the world of Roll20, and it's flaky players. It's people, again, the investment is just much lower. It was kind of it did not conform to what he expected, right? What it would be like. So probably, yeah. Also, like, write it down beforehand. Decide, like, oh, am I trying to run a short game as a sort of pilot for maybe a longer game? That's a great idea. It's great advice. How long do I expect this to last? Maybe any other particular. What are the expectations about availability? That's probably also a good idea, right? I mean, I play online a lot. I always make it clear, like, listen, if you can't make a session, right, whatever, it's online gaming, it happens. Uh, I do try to train people to, if they can't make it, ideally, I want to know like a day in advance. I don't want to start the game and then hear, oh shit, right? I can't make it. That's annoying, right? That sort of stuff. Just figure out like what the expectations are, and as soon as that's clear, it's pretty easy for people to navigate.
Writing a clear mission statement is very useful. That's a skill that will help you a lot. It's just like at a job that if you master that takes you places. And of course, you should not neglect the row of skulls which keep away certain people. Definitely, but
Yeah.
you can
Post your deaths.
you can start with
exactly.
a very clear idea, and perhaps run a starting session that gives you a focused form of what you are trying. That has worked with me for online games. One of my online campaigns started at an online convention. Yeah, it was the Corona pandemic, and real life conventions were no go. So somebody put together a game. We started something. Some of the players liked it and didn't want to continue, and the others formed a stable group, and then we gained a few extra people, and we got a whole campaign out of it.
Yeah, online gaming, I think, is definitely a different bird. I mean, Gus's campaign, I sit in and listen on every once in a while. I don't play in it, but I think that he has a very stable approach. Which he has a core of people who've developed who show up nearly every week that you can pretty much count on to be there, at least for very long stretches at a time, even if they have to step away for a period. And then there's some people who just show up for one or two sessions. They're taste testing it. And that's fine because you've got your regular core. So if there's this kind of ever churning group of people who tag along for a session or two and then are never seen again, that's no big deal. That's good. They're not what the campaign is hinging on, what the campaign is dependent upon. They can just kind of step in and see if they like it and walk away. And ideally, I think that that's what a good fantasy adventure campaign online looks like, is that you've got this core that are moving the campaign forward, and then they're like the in the first edition player's handbook, right, where it says a thief can only adventure with a paladin for a single session, but not long term. Like, those people are the same thing. They're coming in, they're helping out for single session. I mean, they usually are, from what I've listened in, they're productive players when they're playing, and they walk away and they've gotten a good taste of it. And maybe when their situation is different, they'll join a game long term, and so they're just demoing it. Demoing's fine as long as everybody kind of understands it's a demo and the game isn't hanging on the people who are demoing.
Yeah, I've been fortunate on that one. I think that, and I picked a lot of that up too from being involved in the early days in Zerb's game. I think it's a little bit different because Zerb had a great tact on this, where he, like he mentioned before, he'd spent a couple of years getting to know people in Discord communities and kind of handpicking, individuals he knew would be a good fit. And I think that's a great way to go. At the same time, that's kind of an ever evolving process. Like, much to my chagrin, I wish I could play in Zerb's campaign way more, but it's been months for me. I haven't been able to get in with my other commitments and stuff. And so, there's going to be guys like me that are going to have to drop out for life reasons and other priorities, but he will bring in other folks that get recommended, right? It's that kind of word of mouth scenario. So they get vetted, bring it in. Mine's just a little bit different of a model where it's, have that open-ended. I put it out there. When I've got a lot of players, I may not be very proactive about, throwing out that I've got this open game. at the same time as I don't take anything down either that's already been up. So people can ask me about them. I'll let them in. Sometimes that means I'm running really big tables, which is fun. Sometimes it's like, 8 to 12. And if you're running a rule set like, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons or others that can handle larger tables, then it works quite well, even with that downside of having, tons of people jump occasionally for some games. You've got that core group, which is really nice to have. And even that core group could switch out, like E said, every 6 months or so. But I think you have to be in that mindset. I feel like that's got to be something you enjoy. We talked a little bit about before the podcast started. I want to bring it up and kind of transition, not transition, but just a new area of focus on kind of if you have a personality type where you prefer to play with people that you know or know well or know are compatible, you should definitely stick with that, I think. And then if you enjoy meeting new people for both the positive reasons of that, or and you don't mind the downsides, right? You're gonna, like Prince said, you're gonna have, just individuals that are going to be disruptive, and you have to learn how to filter those, and that becomes its own skill. And if you're willing to do that, you can have payoff as well, because you are getting to meet people, new people quite often. If that's interesting to you, then it's good. So how do you guys kind of manage that churn? And it could happen to it, I feel it's probably more common in online games, but how do you guys kind of manage that churning?
Well, I think I ran a pretty long. It was a respectable BX game, Labyrinth Lord game on Pedantic, which eventually made it up to, what was it, 25, 30 sessions, something like that. But yeah, that had quite a bit of churn. I did get a core group out of it eventually, but of course, people that would filter in or they couldn't make it, or would be randos, all sorts of stuff. Um, I guess uh, how to handle it. I don't know. You never really. I never really got into a point where I didn't have anybody to play with. I always had, like, some people would show up, and over time, if what you're doing is enjoyable enough, you know, eh, uh, you'll get some sort of persistent group out of it. I would say if you're running a game, and if you're running an open game, especially, at least advertise that in some way. Talk about it. Don't wait for people to. Don't be that guy that waits in the corner with a beer for them to
That's what I
approach
did.
you. Can I join your game? People would
That's
do
what I
that,
did.
right? But at the same time, talk about it.
Yeah, no, I made a private Discord for it after being asked by people to start a campaign, and then I started the campaign, and so I knew that I was going to have people that were going to be regularly interested. Um, and I have, like, the regulars that show up on certain days, and I have people that are in and out, and I think that's fine. I think from the very beginning, once the campaign started taking form, 46 sessions ago, when I started it, I was like, this is fine. If I have like 3 full-time players and 7 part-time players, then on average I'm going to have 4 or 5 people showing up to a session. That's fine.
I'm a big fan of the forming, storming, norming, and performing thought process in terms of building teams, because that's what you're doing really with a fantasy adventure game campaign, is you're building a team. And so the forming and storming part we've already kind of talked about, like getting an initial group of people together. They've gone through the beginning growth pains, the storming part, to where they're playing, they're functioning. So then you get new people coming in, and that's the norming process. And in terms of like, how do you deal with it? If somebody doesn't seem to be fitting in, if they don't seem to be grokking it, I don't presume right off the bat that they are, a bad actor or something like that. But I'll usually have a conversation with them afterwards. I will give them an opportunity to norm. I'll be like, hey, okay, so this is how we play, and this is what we're doing, and I've noticed some things that, in that last session, it didn't really work well with the group. And so I'm giving them an opportunity to norm, to, like, if they want to norm, if they're just not grokking something, but they want to try and norm to the group, that conversation usually is very quick, and you see a very different approach in the next game. If they're resistant to norming, if they become argumentative, and they that's the point where it's like, okay, hey, let me help you find another game that is actually wanting to do the things that you're talking about. but I don't ever make the group suffer through someone who doesn't want to norm to what the group is already doing, because that just torpedoes the morale of all your core people who are showing up every week.
I do agree with that.
Yeah, it's really easy to lose people over that, and sometimes there's the problem of the big social fallacy is that excluding people is evil, so you will eventually be stuck with the worst people and without the good people. There's that, but also sometimes you have a mismatch of expectations or a misunderstanding, or somebody who has not really picked up yet on what they are supposed to be doing in that campaign.
Yeah, I think I guess I sort of like we sort of I remember the Dreamhouse high level game that we had a while back, actually, where some of the players dropped out after a while, and um probably this could have been accelerated. Attempts to I think there's probably some sort of middle ground where there's probably some sort of liminal space where giving where a little bit of flexibility can maybe decide whether a person can or cannot join. But I would agree that in the majority of cases, if like somebody is definitely having trouble, you should be forthright and then give them the option, like to like either adjust properly, approach it, like and then no hard feelings, or right, quit. Also, no hard feelings.
And so I think this is something that would be really good to kind of drill into, especially when it comes to real life games where you kind of have a very more limited player pool to choose from. What are good ways to compromise? What kind of stuff is okay to compromise on? Maybe you have a player that is more interested in having some narrative elements, or one that is, more into some simulationist or realism stuff, right? Um, what are good ways to compromise, and what are bad ways that are going to kind of compromise the integrity of the game?
Have you ever? I don't know if you've ever had it, but I remember in my younger years when we would play with this DM, and he would bend over backwards. He would try to give the players, no, you can have this, and I did this for you, right? And this is just a sort of pathetic dog-like existence. A DM should have a right. You should have a strong vision. You should definitely run a game that you want to run, not the game that people want to that they want to run the game that you want to run uh, in a convincing way. And the ideal part is that, like, if you do that properly, they'll be interested enough, um, uh, and they'll have a great time. Um, I think, right. Uh, Figure out what motivates people to come to your table. It's to me, it's acceptable you know if players like if you consistently kill your players, right? While you feel like you're telegraphing that they just don't get the hint, maybe consider being a little bit more clear. uh if you use puzzles or riddles, and every time you do that and begin groaning, maybe also consider doing less puzzles. I feel D&D is fairly broad, right? So in the type of like structure, the type of challenges uh that you're putting in front of them, you have a little bit of leeway, but don't try to twist the game into something that is not, simply to accommodate, right, wildly incompatible expectations. If everybody is super comfortable with pretending to be an elf and role playing, but whenever you get into the dungeon they get just bored and frustrated, then maybe consider a different game, right?
At the same time, like if you're running a table and you have one dude that wants to wear a frilly shirt and speak in an accent the whole time, and
That's
nobody else
great.
at the table is into that, like, you have to make that person feel ashamed and absolutely abhorrent of the mutant that he
No,
is.
you can have
I support
one
this.
guy, and he needs an inhibitor. He needs a control collar that'll deliver
Yes,
electroshock if it's too
exactly.
much.
Correct his behavior.
I do feel that you sometimes have players that are okay. Sometimes you have players that are like just pieces of shit, right? Get rid of them immediately. But there is a type of player that is good or even great, but they need to be managed in a way, right? Their impulses need to be directed a little bit. And I feel it's acceptable to have one or two of these. You can have one role-playing guy as long as he's also, doing the other stuff.
Prince always trying to carve out a space for himself in every game.
That's right.
That's all that's
That's right.
happening here. But
It's
I mean,
not
I think in
happening
terms
here.
of
I get to, oh, damn. All right. Well, okay. I'll see you guys. I'm off to the NSR. I'm going to play Cairn.
no, I mean, I think that there's always a difference between, are you bringing a game to a long-standing group of people, or are you trying to bring people to a long-standing game? I mean, if I have a group of friends and we hang out a lot and we kind of cycle through stuff like, hey, let's do this thing together, let's do that thing together, then the game will have to either bend, or if it would need to bend in such a way that you wouldn't enjoy running it, then you just need to find something else to do, like play bridge. Like, that's the social aspect with that group is predominant because it came first and it's what's actually important. And so maybe a fantasy adventure game will fit with that group, maybe it won't. You're going to handle that very differently than if you are recruiting for a game where you're not necessarily trying to bring a game to a long-standing group of people. So recognize that those two situations are different and don't use the same sort of behavior when putting together a group that you would with a long-standing group of friends.
I mean, and if like it's taking away from the other players at the table, if this one dude wants to get up there and like deliver these monologues, and the other players at the table are just like, oh, can we get back to the game? Or if this one guy wants to spend like 45 minutes shopping, then like
Yeah, okay. No,
then
you need to cut that down immediately. Okay, that has to be a hard no, right?
that's
Yeah,
it's
and communicate it clearly. You can just say we should not be doing this.
yeah.
We
You
have
got
a
to manage the
focus.
expectations on some.
That's what we should be doing. Please, let's not do this. And okay, some people will not budge, but most people will.
To some level, you have to be clear about setting the expectations of the table. It's okay to like, kind of let the rubber bend a little bit, in a certain directions here and there. That's all well and good, I guess. If you're down for it and the rest of the table is going to be better for it, that's a big if. But on some level, you have to say like, I've just made you cordon bleu. You better not put ketchup on it.
Not putting ketchup on things is actually just a good life rule for everything. But
yeah. They're trying to make it more palatable and familiar to themselves, and just this is the game. This is the cordon bleu. Try it, you'll like it.
Listen, sir, we do funny voices on this table. I didn't see you role play once. What do you think this is? That's right. You got to lay down the law with these ruffians. No, but
bring it back to,
yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, and I was just going to say I do agree. With this sort of like idea of like allowing the reins to veer a little bit. It's like sometimes your players are going to goof off a little bit or like run away with a little moment, but 85% of the time, 90% of the time, they should be like goal oriented and kind of like focused and engaged, right? It shouldn't just be
there is a difference here, I think, about between real life campaigns and online campaigns. I find that in a real life environment, you have more leeway for goofing off, for weird tangents, and sort of a less focused play. And because of the specific features of online gaming, which comes from the lack of face-to-face interaction and the lack of non-verbal cues and all that sort of distance, you have to be more focused, and you have to filter this out a bit more strongly. You have to structure your sessions a little bit. Even your campaign has to be just a little bit tighter.
Yeah, I mean, I think that to reground what Milan said about a mission statement, and then to tie that in what I said about the forming, storming, norming, performing thing. If you wrote a mission statement, is the campaign still progressing towards performing on that mission statement, and is everybody having fun? Then you've got some leeway. Every group of people is going to vary a little bit. If you have Prince, you're going to have some funny voices, but if you're not going toward the performing stage anymore, then something has gotten off track.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it, and definitely also, I think that's also it's a good point that if you're recruiting, if your group is new, you should be pretty strict and pretty, your game should be pretty tight. I I think if you and I don't know how universal this is, but I assume it's kind of true. If you play if you play with a DM for years and years and years with the same group, you're gonna have. I mean, hopefully not all the time, but you're gonna have one of these sessions where somebody phones it in, right? Where it's not quite like a. You notice he's not giving it his all. Maybe the DM hasn't prepped that well. Maybe the players are hungover, but they'll be like, you'll have a day like that. That's fine. Uh, but yeah, it's the expectations are totally different. If I join an online game, uh, and session number one, the DM has, doesn't really know what he's doing. He's goofing off, that sort of stuff. I'll whatever, you thank him for your game, and you pick one of 300 other games that are also being hosted, right? So there's a totally different sort of like expectation there.
So I think one of the things that like Josh brought up a focus on not necessarily style, but on, I mean, some ways style, but mechanics as well. So you've got a range of players we've talked about that, you can enjoy a little more, cracking jokes a little more often than strict, game players that are just, playing gamer gaming, as we like to say, 100% of the time, right? That goes for what Josh said, where there's folks that prefer maybe more realism in their game, or simulationism, whatever you want to call it. Same thing on the other side, where we've got folks that are a little more focused on narrative or overarching story or what have you. How far, deviation wise, do you guys feel like you're allowed to go on either way? And is there one side or the other that's maybe more acceptable or less acceptable when it comes to fantasy adventure gaming? Basically, how much leeway, we've talked about it a little bit, kind of touched on a little bit, how much leeway do you give before you really start reining it back in your at your tables?
Yeah, and also just to kind of piggyback on top of that, so when we're talking about realism and stuff like that, I also kind of mean players who are really wanting to get into it's almost kind of like the domain aspect of the game, but like taking it to the next level where, they're looking at starting merchant caravans and having a bunch of kind of simulation of stuff running in the background or happening. I'm just kind of curious what the extent of that is okay and yeah, so on and so forth.
Well, I think every group, like I said, will deviate in certain ways that cater to the desires of that group. I mean, if you got a group of people who have a lot of axe experience, then they're probably going to interject more simulation of stuff in than a group that is coming from the other side. I think that the guide light to me is, if this is in, do people understand that it is a diversion, or is there part of the group who is kind of hoping to kind of steer that into becoming more of the main focus, to where the fantasy adventure gaming part starts to take a hit? Because you can have little splashes of color here and there, um, without it being any sort of a big problem, as long as it continues to kind of move forward to, like, no, we're exploring, we're using our player skills to tackle problems, we have goal setting by the players, and they're going out and exploring the campaign world and tackling those goals, and everybody's having a good time. If it's getting too much, then some of your people who didn't come there for that are going to start having less of a time, and there's going to be some griping. And I think that's an obvious point that things went a little bit too far.
We have had that with domain play that it worked out in one campaign perfectly well. It complemented the other adventures, and in another it sort of took over the campaign, and it some people really enjoyed it, and some weren't into it, and that was to the detriment of that particular experience. So you have to balance it.
I would say, as long as the either the majority or at least like the most vocal active players, the guys driving the bus basically or driving the action, are still firmly aligned with what you're trying to do, then it's perfectly okay to especially if you're, if you have a real life table, if people do not fully 100% confirm to like the ideal picture of the perfect fantasy adventure gaming player that you have in your head. Um, but yeah, again, with this merchant caravan thing, or I remember having a coworker player that kept trying to find wolves to sort of like pet and train uh, to to immense difficulty, obviously. Like, but right, you do have to like sort of like I think it's kind of like what E said. You shouldn't lose track of like why you're out there. I think it's even acceptable if somebody tries to sort of like start a merchant company, um, as long as you make it clear that, like, okay, listen up, listen, we run a dungeon campaign here, okay? I'm not into that. If you're into that, it might be fun, right? It might also be something you can do in the background, and it can generate hooks and all of that stuff. I'm not saying that you can't work with it, but yeah, that this expectation thing should be clear.
I mean, the fantasy adventure game itself is a group activity. Now, I mean, AD&D is my game, especially as it starts branching out in levels. There's clearly aspects of AD&D that are so specialized in a particular class that it's hard to bring that into a group, right? So, like the high level thief, he gets a thieves guild. Well, the whole group probably is not going to be involved with that thieves guild. So there's nothing wrong with outside of the game session, the DM and the player of that specialized thing doing a little bit of solo type gaming, if one particular person is really interested in that, and both that player and that DM have some time. I think where it starts to get more into a problem is where that somebody who has a very specialized thing that they want to do in the game wants to put that on the table when everybody's trying to play, and then everybody kind of just has to tag along, and the campaign just kind of turns into this one special thing for this one special player. When everybody gets together at the table, that's when you're doing group type stuff. That's when it's more traditional adventuring. Maybe you alternate, right? So like if there's a fighter who has a stronghold, there might be some adventure where he and his stronghold play a highlighted role in an adventure that the entire group is going on. But the campaign does not just become about that fighter's stronghold. That's where it's going over the line.
Nice. So moving into another topic of conversation, this is more, I would call this kind of DM or ref culture, as far as the culture at a fantasy adventure game table for the DM and how he runs it. So thinking of the styles that we just described, trad gaming or traditional gaming, maybe pure story games, we've kind of highlighted those a little bit just so we can give a different kind of juxtaposed against them. Compared to those games, how much, for you guys personally, how much improv do you have as a DM in kind of comparison to how much do you prep and run it, specific to what, your key locations, everything's kind of outlined, you have everything kind of ready to go, or somewhere in the between, like a hybrid in between those two. Kind of what's your guys' take on where a DM or a ref should be in a fantasy adventure game? And then if you want, you can kind of compare that to the other styles of play as well.
I think online and in real life offer different strengths. So online, using a VTT, you can preload all the maps, and you can have the monsters on the DM layer, or you can have them ready to drag on there at a moment's notice, or whatever the prep is that you want to do. And it takes time to set that up so that you can have a smooth online performance. Some people don't use VTTs, and they just kind of, they either theater minded, or they use a whiteboard, or whatever the case may be. So you have like an array of like preparation that you have to do ahead of time. In real life, it's a lot easier to just kind of go on. The players are mapping, you tell them what's there, and you can improv like, okay, well, they're doing something unexpected with this particular area, so we're just going to go with it. And I think that you could do that easily online, but I think that if one of the things that kind of limits my game online is that I put all the maps up and I have, I make sure that they're all ready to go so that I can run the game smoother. And if the players say, we want to go to this place that you didn't put any time into uploading, and it's like, well, I got to stop the game and I got to go grab the map and then I got to export it and then I got to upload it and then I got to put the fog of war on it and then I got to do this. So like sometimes it's a little bit more limiting, but in real life you can go anywhere. We'll figure it out when you get there.
That's actually a pretty good point. Yes, I've been using Foundry. I actually like how, in some way, the system is kind of pliable, and it's very easy to improvise or to create a sort of skeletal monster that um, maybe will not have all of the attributes hard coded, but it'll have enough so that the tabletop can automatically calculate whether or not attack rolls or saving throws have succeeded, right? Or how many hit points it has. That all of that good stuff. I feel I'm most comfortable when I'm working with prep, but at the same time, I do feel it should be, if not a requirement, it should be a highly desirable skill for you to to improvise or roll with the punches. If your players are doing something, um, you know, they're doing something unexpected, you should be able to roll with that.
No, I completely agree. I mean, you should be able to roll with the punches to a degree, but sometimes I feel online, if you're doing prep with a tool, that sometimes as much as the tool helps you, it limits you in other areas.
It is useful to have a turn prep base for at least the core areas of your campaign. But you don't have to commit the same level of detail everywhere. You can have some things which are more detailed, and then some at sort of an idea kernel or just half-baked idea level, and you can use that as a springboard for improvisation, because if you already have some dots on the map, you can connect the dots, and then details emerge from you or your players connecting the dots, and that's something that has been very helpful to me. Like the old wilderness of high fantasy setting comes with these very, very granular, very enigmatic location entries in the wilderness, and that's a great sort of cue to build from. And you can sort of spin it into entire sessions, or within a session, a few encounters worth of interaction, and then you can dedicate your major efforts to fleshing out a few places where a lot of action will happen, and there you have to sort of bring a baseline level of complexity from the start to really deliver something that's meaty, that's in depth, that's complex.
Yeah, I hate the word prep. Prep is loaded with guilt, right? I mean, it's like that cook in the kitchen who's like, well, I slaved over this hot stove. Why don't you like the cranberry sauce for this Thanksgiving dinner? It's artisanal. I made it by hand. It's like, well, I hate cranberry sauce. Like, why did you bother? What I say is that my sessions are almost pure improv, but that's only because I world build outside of the session. So I am never at any point trying to figure out what the players, are going to do. I'm not trying to anticipate what the players will do. I think that that's pointless, and it just is going to lead to a lot of tears. And I think this is one of the reasons why there's very few DMs in this hobby, is because they think that they have to succeed at something that is almost an impossible task. And if they don't, then they have to try and force the game in that direction. So what I'm doing is I'm world building outside of the campaign. I'm world building for me. I'm world building because I find it enjoyable. My world building stops where the PCs start. So I'm never trying to figure out what I want to world build. Is like, okay, there's this place, there's these people in it. All of these people have things that they're trying to do. They're not just sitting around. So what are they doing? How are they doing it? And once I have places and things and people who are trying to do things and cool treasures and all of that type of stuff, I stop. And then when it comes up in play, it's technically improv because whatever happens is not something that I had planned out. But then all I'm doing is saying, okay, well, this is who these people are and this is what they're trying to do. And now the players have just interjected themselves into this situation. How will they respond? So how they respond is based upon all of the world building that I did earlier, and then I just roll with it. But no, I'm never at any point trying to guess ahead of time what people are going to do. The actual play itself is all improvisation.
But I do think this also comes with maybe time, or oh, I mean, I guess maybe you do a little bit more work beforehand, or you already have a persistent world. I think as you get better, you become more adept at figuring out, I guess, sort of like what attributes you can flesh out beforehand, what you can simply infer, what to I guess what to focus on.
Yeah, no, I will sometimes if I'm thinking I'm going to actually write something up to hand out to other people, I will tip players off that, like, can we do this in sort of playtest mode? Because there's an objective that the campaign is participating in, but it's outside of the campaign technically, and most people are fine with that. I mean, so there is more of a structured situation. But for just regular campaign play, it's all improvisation.
That's interesting. Yeah, like the world building element of it. So how much time for a brand new, so someone, again, we like to put this in someone's new to the game, someone's new to this style of play. I know we've talked about it a little bit, but as far as, and I know that Milan has a great primer on this. There's a lot of good information out there and a lot of these rule sets that facilitate adventure gaming. But for you guys, how much time did you dedicate, or do you advise someone new dedicating to, and what would that scope be for them getting started with the world building kind of style of play?
Yeah, I think also along with that, what's the minimum amount of stuff that you have to have done before you should be good to get started?
Yeah, for a brand new campaign, just kicking off, first time DM, that type of thing.
Just simply working outwards is very useful. You start with a starting location and a few outside it, and let things sort of fill in as the campaign progresses. So you have a dungeon, you have a home base, you have a chunk of wilderness. That should be enough for a start. And a lot of people start to really do all in depth all the time, and that's sort of that's a maximalist approach that works for some, but realistically, for most people, it is more convenient to start with a few simple modular components like here is a castle, here are some situations around the castle, here is a small dungeon, here is another small dungeon, and then stitch it together. That's an approach that's friendly to starting out, that's friendly to even newbie gamers, and it works. It has a pretty good track record.
And I guess in situations like that, it becomes more likely that your players will do something that maybe you haven't fully anticipated, right? So I feel the sort of the improvisation skill starts to creep back in there. You should be able to swing with the punches. Otherwise, that's great advice. I agree.
In terms of trying to define a minimum, I think that's a mindset thing. It's just like writing, right? Writers write. They enjoy writing. They're not trying to write only enough in order to get something out the door. So if you're talking about a world building culture, which I think is a subset within the fantasy adventure game culture, I agree. All you really need is a starting area, a dungeon, some seeds of what's going on in the broader world, and know what the movers and shakers in that area are trying to do. Probably that should only take a week or two, I mean, in order to put something together if you've got a good amount of time during that week or two to do it. But from that point on, if you're running a world building style campaign with a lot of improvisation, then you're going to be writing a lot. I mean, there's no way around it. And that style is not for everybody. It's for people who enjoy doing it. There's nothing wrong with what I call chain a module. Like if you know that you are not a world builder and instead you want to just run chains of modules that other people wrote because you enjoy their creativity, that's fine. Then your job gets a lot easier because you probably only have to have just enough background details in order to bridge one module to the next, and your players are probably also fine with just running through and playing modules. It's a perfectly acceptable style of play. You can still play it as a fantasy adventure game style with player skill and all of that. But it is different, and that is the style that took over in the 80s. I mean, you could see the transition point in the DMG where they talk about tournament modules, where the presumption was is that everybody were world builders and they were all running organic campaigns. But then when you got to a tournament, that didn't work. And so now we needed everybody to agree to this artificial kind of stricture where we're just going to do chained modules over the course of 4 days and declare a winner. And that became how everybody played D&D. And that's okay. Just recognize that they're different.
I've heard of some people, and this is in particular using the entries in No Art Punk to run a sort of like it's like a hybrid game, I guess. So they run by their own description, right? Like mostly it's like a sandbox game. They world build, they do their own stuff, but because it's open ended, they and these little adventures allow for it. They just plunk them down in the campaign map, right?
Yeah. When I put a campaign together, I often will seed different modules in, like Hawk's modules. I've already got those slotted into a place on my campaign map. Nobody's ever gone there, but they're there, and I would just go ahead and pull them out if and when people, bid on something to go and look at those.
Yeah, I feel that's a more healthy. I guess healthy is maybe a little bit pejorative, but I should say, I think that's a more fuller, better realized form of like uh, playing the game, I guess. If you only do modules, then you're just like you're only executing. Um, but right, as long as you're still also doing the world building stuff, it seems perfectly all right to to outsource some of your work. Why not? You're also using tables to presumably a lot of work with the tables has been done for you as well. You only have to make some adjustments.
Well, I do think it's important to use other people's work, even in a campaign that is world built or whatever, because those are just tendency breakers, and it also helps make the world feel different from the players. So I wouldn't say that there's no place for modules, but there's a difference between I bought this, I read this, I'm going to stick this somewhere, and if it's never played, that's okay, versus the players. There are players who just want to ask the DM, what are we doing next? And there are DMs who just want to be able to buy stuff. And so I wouldn't want to try and say that, like, okay, well, you guys are not fantasy adventure gamers, because it's about a style of play. It's not about a style of campaign to that degree. I've definitely played with some people who only ran modules and the bridging between them was very thin, where it was gameplay that I enjoyed. So, I of course prefer organic campaigns by far. But the actual sessions can be enjoyable even and recognizably fantasy adventure gaming, even if people don't do a lot of world building.
It is a jump up in complexity when you move from a module centric game to a more open-ended game. And that's part of my gaming career, that when I started rediscovering or discovering old school gaming, we ran modules, necromancer games, the TSR classics, and a few others. And after that, sort of moved into the Wildlands style of a more open environment where modules are not self-contained scenarios, and they are more like a bundle of possibilities, or locations or whatever, and they can be, in some sense, they can be simpler. They don't have to be as comprehensive because the world, the context will supply a lot of the things you need to make them work or make them run. But I think there's a cautionary note that you have to, as EOTB said, you have to sort of expect to put in some more work if you try to run something complex and setting based.
Excellent. Well, I think we covered everything we really wanted to get through today, but I want to leave you gentlemen with the last word. If there's anything that came up that we didn't discuss that you were thinking about in your head rolling around, now is the time. We'd love to hear any comments about anything we brought up today.
Well, I had a thought just now as you closed off the topic. It was actually that with adventure writing sort of like standards, that's also kind of been I guess sort of a shift and an unforeseen drawback that in at least in the OSR, that the shift away from vanilla fantasy and a focus on just sort of like making something that's like whatever totally unique or it breaks all the rules and that sort of stuff, is that this um, eh, you end up with material that at least theoretically might be more individually might be more, it'll draw more eyes, maybe it's more engaging, I don't know, but it actually becomes much harder to sort of use this as part of a campaign, because maybe all of the underlying assumptions of a normal D&D campaign world are kind of like violated. And I'm sure you can probably adjust or write around that, but it does. I have heard it brought up that it's kind of like an issue. It's like something is like
Well,
too strange.
I'm pretty sure you could put Keep on the Borderlands in Cube World very easily.
Mm. It's good. That was my one. I was worried about not being able to do that. Yeah. um, but yeah, the right, Keep on the Borderlands is like is a great example of something that you can plunk down almost anywhere, right?
It's
Uh,
very stone soup.
yes, but right, on the other end of the spectrum, what is it? Like Deep Carbon Observatory, maybe not so much, because like very sort of specific interpretations are made around kind
And
of like
not just
a lot
that,
of things.
but you put a Deep Carbon Observatory in your campaign, and it will remake your campaign in its own image.
Right.
It's not really the material that you can just use to integrate into everything. While the Judges Guild stuff, at least the better stuff, is probably the greatest template for that.
Yeah, I think so. With the Judges Guild, it was usually just
It's
as
bits
long
and
as you're okay.
pieces, yeah.
Yeah, with a little bit more, maybe like more of a sword and sandals type of atmosphere than maybe default Greyhawk, but it's not that much. It doesn't violate that many strictures. It still tastes like D&D basically.
Yeah, that's the thing, that it's fairly close to the play style, and it has its own vibe. Definitely, there is a interesting cultural difference, but it's not alien.
Oh, for sure.
In terms of my last word, I would just go ahead and say, to kind of sum up everything, I think it's important from a mental perspective, if you want to do fantasy adventure gaming, to fully embrace the fact that you are a minority play style in the larger hobby, and that you are zigging where most of the hobby zags, and you're going to get a lot of pushback. There's going to be a lot of people who almost kind of attack it in a way, because all of a sudden there's people advocating for a style of play that they don't want, and so theoretically the number of tables that person can play in has just decreased by at least one, and that bothers them. But that's okay. I mean, you're trying to find other outliers like you, and it doesn't get you down if that's more difficult or anything like that. It's just, look, this is a style of play that I enjoy, and I'm willing to do a little bit more social activity outside of the game in order to get a crew that can Storm and Form and Norman perform to that style of play. And if you go into it with that mindset of the majority of people are not going to like what I do, and that doesn't bother you, then that's the first big hurdle that's overcome.
I like it. Just want to Zerb anything, Milan, Prince. Just want to make sure I let you guys have a little bit of time if you wanted to take it for any random thoughts.
I would say don't do what I do with world building. It's like my method. My method was to just keep running with something until I filled out a whole hex map, and I wrote all these dungeons, and I had them all done, and they're all ready to hit play. I don't. I think that was just a period of my life where I had a lot of time to devote to that. Um, and I don't think you need to do that, but that's what I did. So that's why I was kind of quiet during the whole thing. Is like I went the complete opposite thing. I did everything. I did the whole map. I did everything in the map, and then I took a good look at it and said, okay, it's ready to go.
And you enjoyed that whole process, right? I mean,
I
I
enjoyed that whole process. I personally have never run a campaign where I just have, a dinky town and like a little patch of woods and then a dungeon on the other side. It's just not me. It's just not something that like I feel like I could do much more in. And I think that like with like writing ambition, and by the way, writing for something that you're going to do your own campaign is a far cry from writing for, as I learned when I did the Noir Punk contest for the first time. It's very difficult to convey what you're trying to DM onto a piece of paper for somebody else to read and then like get that same impression. So as long as you can make notes that make sense to yourself, I think that like as long as you keep doing it, that do what's comfortable, do what you think you have the capacity to do. Take the modules that you think will fit in your world, or write your own if that's what you can do. But I think that everybody kind of has their own approach. I think that mine is probably the most nonsensical, but it's also something I enjoyed most, so it made the most sense for me.
I feel your approach is actually very sensible, but at the same time, uh, if we disabuse new people from trying that, the people that are wired properly to do that anyway, they will not get discouraged. Whereas what I hear with particularly people that get started, they get started with like, these towering sort of expectations, go into it, and then they kind of like they get discouraged or they burn out. In the beginning, your games are going to be, you're going to have like a period of like adjustment. Maybe your
Or
games
they
won't be as
never
good,
play. They
right?
never end up playing it. They
Right.
made all this stuff and
That's
then they leave it half chewed
that's
and they never play.
now that we're talking, actually, that's another one, right? I think the big problem with world building, and we brought it up earlier with you know trad gaming, and that's kind of like why I think even this phrase world building in the OSR kind of has a bit of a bad rep because it describes this DM who has this whole giant world in his head, and he's like a you know and he's focusing on all of these Harn-like details on the languages and like the history and the players. It's all sort of anticipatory. Like he's just imagining this grand thing, and it never actually manifests, right? That's like sort of the horror image that has been created, and it doesn't have to be that way.
No,
Um,
and you have to also be okay if you're going to do a bunch of world building. Make sure that you're going to do not too much that you're never going to play. But number two, you have to be kind of hinted at it a few times. You have to be okay with people never going places. You might have. I had done the numbers on. I mean, it was probably about 15 sessions ago in my campaign. But like out of all the dungeons that and adventure sites that these online Spire group went to, they missed 60% of the rooms, and they just like these are rooms that will most likely never be explored, and you have to be okay with that. You have to be okay that like your genius isn't going to be seen at every corner. You have to be willing to let things go, give them the total freedom to go wherever they're going to go. They're not going to see everything. You got to do this for you.
that I mean, if you're not going to publish it anyway, I suppose that those rooms that have been left completely unexplored, if some of them were very cool, you can always sort of like reuse them later, right? If they never get seen, then well, okay, maybe I'll use them again, right?
It,
Let's be
it's
efficient
kind of
here.
it's kind of this, and I'm just going to draw like a little quick parallel. Notice how diary writing has fell out of fashion, and now everybody just writes everything on a blog for everyone to see, but they would never just write out their thoughts for themselves in a book that only they read. I mean, there's a psychological element to that. If you're going to be a world builder, you have to be somebody who would be comfortable writing out a very detailed diary that no one else would ever read, because here that's not necessarily true. In that, the entire diary is open for players, but the satisfaction of the diary writer is in writing for themselves. So if that bothers you, if you would never write a blog post if people didn't read it, and you would also never write a diary, then world building is probably going to be very disappointing. And I would differentiate it from the Harn style world building, where it's just completely, over detailed.
Self-indulgent versus something
Yes.
that is meant to be, which genuinely is meant to be used. And I can confirm that if something is hidden, if you later if either you tell the players beforehand or you tell them afterwards, it'll just ruin it. It'll not be fun. You have to kind of like sit on that and be okay with that.
Right.
I fully
Right.
agree.
Yeah,
You
just
have
like
to.
just like diary writing.
It's useful to have secrets that remain a little bit beyond the reach of the players, and that adds an air of mystery to the game that's useful. But also sometimes people will just avoid entire adventures that you have worked on, and don't treat it as a loss. Treat it as a long-term investment that you can reuse in a different campaign.
The group found a hidden sub level in a couple sessions ago, and I was ecstatic that they found it. I was like, oh cool, we get to play down here. I didn't think they were ever going to find it, and didn't think they were going to ever visit it, and now they're down there. And so sometimes when they find something that you were kind of like, they're probably not going to find it. It's kind of exciting.
Yeah, it's fun. Like some of my players in our current City of Vultures campaign discovered something that I wrote 10 years ago, and the other party never ever got close to it. That was, it's quite satisfying. And they were coming at it from a completely different angle. So you can kind of reuse your materials, and every time a new group of players, different contacts, different adventures, they will encounter them differently.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm running 2 concurrent campaigns on the same exact stuff, and the paths have been very different.
And that's the spontaneity of adventure gaming, or even the broader role-playing form, that it's not just you performing, and that separates it from the sort of top-down godlike style of world building, that it's co-creation, and it is co-creation through action and interaction.
Awesome. Well, I think that's the perfect note to leave things off on. Is there anything else anyone wants to bring up, or?
I think we're good. I had written a 50-page manifesto in defense of funny voices, but I think I will leave that for now.
It'll be a
We'll save
separate.
that for the
That'll be a
next time,
separate
yeah.
separate
There'll be a
episode.
separate episode. You will be present, but you will not be allowed to speak. I'll just be reciting.
Yeah,
I want an
yeah.
entire
Well,
episode.
It's a monologue. We'll just have Prince speaking. Yeah.
No, I want an entire episode of Gus and Prince going to the mat over funny voices, and Prince has to do his entire side of the episode in the Dutch aristocrat voice.
Nice.
See, I think I would automatically lose because he's going to be more entertaining. So,
True.
like everybody, even if I make all the points logically and win, everybody else will be like, nah, but Prince still wins because it's entertaining. So
It would also be this cloud of confusion. You would just be lost. Yeah, it's perfect. In my mirror maze. Very nice.
absolutely.
All right.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for the quality conversation. As always, we much appreciated. And yeah, we'll be back for the next episode. Just as a little spoiler for everybody out there, we're gonna take a little pause from kind of these mainline fundamental episodes, move into kind of smaller portion, very specialized type things for maybe the next episode or two. One of those out there is we got a couple gentlemen that will be attending Cauldron Con. So we're definitely going to want to hear, and we'll definitely record an episode on that experience for the first ever Cauldron Con taking place in Germany, lovingly being called KrautCon. So, all right. Thank you guys.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well. Quite the conversation on play cultures and the social element of the game. Hopefully, you guys found this interesting. We definitely enjoyed having the conversation with the crew. As far as my takeaways and the things that I really enjoyed about this podcast and the conversation, very much the focus that we had around picking a rule set and developing a play culture at your table that enjoys and seeks out experiencing the whole game. And when I say the whole game, I mean levels 1 through 15, 1 through 20, and all the different types of modes of play that are involved over those levels, and really encouraging your table to dive deep into the rule set, to try and attempt to gain a mastery of that rule set and to become skilled players, because I feel like there's so much depth to a lot of these old school systems, very much specifically like Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. I feel like there's so much depth to that system. It's been battle tested over the years, and it's a great cure to this current trend in the OSR around only playing levels 1 through 3. I mean, me personally, I did that for a number of years early in my journey in RPGs, and it's just tiring. It's tiresome, and it's so limiting. And what you experience, the full rule set, it only adds to, like, your enjoyment of the game. And I think it's one of the biggest things that classic adventure gaming, fantasy adventure gaming has to offer to both the DM and to the players of the table, is basically the scope of the game. And just too few people are exploring in that. I've gotten my feet wet in it now over the last couple of years, and I'm never looking back. So I'm glad that we had that conversation. I'm glad that these guys kind of broke that down, and we gotta dive a little bit deeper into that. Josh, what jumped out for you?
Yeah, so the main thing you kind of brought it up a little bit there when you're talking about other trends and that kind of stuff in the OSR. It's really awesome, especially since like a lot of our guests have been around for basically the full duration of the OSR. You get a lot of perspective on the different kind of play cultures and play styles and types of people who are interacting with these games. So for someone like me who's gotten in fairly recently, like around the last 3 or 4 years, it's just super informative and useful to get kind of that full scope. So that's what I liked about the podcast.
Totally agree as well. Good stuff. So, for just to give a little preview for the next episodes to follow, we've been doing these fundamental episodes for 1, 2, and 3. We're going to take a little bit of a break. Don't worry, we're going to get back to these. We have many topics to cover on the fundamental side, but we're going to take a little bit of a hiatus and dive into some niche conversations, possibly some one-on-ones with some pretty interesting creators, as well as maybe cover a very recent con that went on for old school gaming, and who knows, maybe something else before we jump back into these fundamental episodes. So there's just a little bit of taste of what's to come. Again, we are increasing the frequency, hopefully, of these podcasts for you guys to enjoy. We'd love to hear some feedback from you as well. Please, listen, reach out to us, let us know, what you'd like to hear in the future, topics of conversation. Josh, anything you want to plug before we sign off tonight?
Yeah, definitely. So the most exciting thing for me right now, I'm really hyped on the Discord. There's just been a ton of really great conversation there. I'm starting to see a real kind of community develop. I'm really looking forward to, I believe it's user Commodore is going to be putting on an adventure site contest starting in December. So just seeing people get together and do creative stuff like that is just really, really cool for me. So definitely recommend people check that out. Yeah.
Thank you guys. Appreciate everyone tuning in. Hope you were able to get something valuable out of this conversation and this particular episode. And we look forward to you guys tuning in on our next episode. Take care, everyone.